I want to spend not a ton of time, but just a few minutes here just to sort of level set at the beginning and talk about how you guys are seeing the learning experience, some of the factors that are driving changes in the learning environment, the learning experience. Because it used to be pretty easy to define and control. We started with the classroom, then we put there was learning in the field, then we put in e-learning, and it's just sort of exploded, and it's become there's so many more factors and things that we need to consider. So, from all of your point of view, if we can just kind of run down the panel, what are those factors that you see are driving change and innovation in learning? Before we dive into talking about UX, so Michael, why don't we start with you?
I mean, I think people can go anywhere. Right, and we find our learners, they do that. We all know that, right? They'll go on and they'll search for learning. Now, whether it's the right learning or not, that we can question that, but they are not questioning that. And so one of the things that I think is important for us is to get in front of that in a way that meets their needs and their interests, just to go anywhere to focus on their own development, because they're doing it. So we've had to change because of that.
So yeah, it's the pressures of the learner themselves that are driving some of the change. Andy, what about you?
Yeah, so the role of the learner has definitely changed over time. There's a lot of information that you can gather from different devices. So your phone gives you information. It's hard to kind of retain students now too, because they can go and read reviews and see how other schools are teaching them and understand those learning styles. But even beyond that, the average adult, 60% of adults use 3 or more devices. So that has to be an influencer of how we present content to them and how they learn. So we've got to pay attention to those trends and trends in technology. The trick is we can't rely on technology to deliver that solid learning experience. We have to use technology as an aid to delivering that learning experience to our learners.
Mm-hmm. Rhoda, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think one of the, something else that adds on top of this is the changing needs. I think the need for scale is more than for global footprint, scaling over time. Time is a commodity now, and I'm often I'll have negotiations with people that are asking we need a training on this, how long will it take? I'll say something like 5 days, and then they'll come back with how about 1? You kind of go back and forth, and it's well, no, the human brain doesn't work like that. But I think just that need for efficiency and the need for globalization drives a lot of technology.
Yeah, all right. Samantha, let's finish with you.
Yep, and I'll add on to what everybody said here, and that we are living in a very fast-paced digital world, and we honestly have to keep up with it. I mean, think about what you do when you wake up in the morning. You grab your phone, you check your notifications, you check your messages, you might go onto Facebook or LinkedIn or some other social media platform. We are addicted to that, and so the question becomes, how do you make learning as addictive as social media and the other things that you do every single day? So how do you make that a habit? And I mean, a lot of it, changes the experience of what people do today to learn. Mm-hmm.
So just to kind of close this out, why is it so important then to think about the learning experience? So can you kind of crystallize that for the folks in this room? Why is it so important, given these factors that you've all talked about, that the learning experience needs to be top of mind for many of us? And I'll stay with you, Samantha.
Sure. So if you think about it, I mean, you want your learning experience to be, or your social learning platform, whatever you've got, to be as easy as a Google search, as fun as a Facebook, and as smart as Amazon suggestions. You want that to be contextually relevant to people, outcome focused, and personalized.
Rhoda?
Yeah, I think most people's interactions with anything that's in real life or digital is a user experience, and the learning experience is just another step of that. It's a user interacting with something, and the way we interact with everything else, this is something tailored for their learning as well.
So I think it's more that the playing field is now leveled, right? So aside from a few institutions or organizations, you can't just put out learning content and assume because who you are, students or learners are going to come and try to learn from you. Now it's kind of more about experience. They say that by 2020, experience will overtake price and product as a key differentiator. So you can't just rely on your reputation. You have to continue to evolve and continue to grow and provide value to people.
All right, so Michael,
Yeah,
finish
for
it
me,
up.
it's all about time. I think about that learner experience. If they're going on to something that's a webinar or some type of digital asset, I mean, 7 to 10 seconds, they're making decisions about, am I staying or not? And we want them to stay, and we also want to make sure that they're not going elsewhere and wasting time on things that are not adding value to what they're trying to do. So we really need to capture them, and it really starts with that user experience.
Okay, great. All right, so now I want to turn to this idea of user experience. And just, show of hands, how many of you guys are familiar with, outside of learning, the idea of user experience and what it means? Okay, so a fair amount of people here are pretty familiar with it. But Andy, I want to start with you and kind of get your definition of what user experience is, because you're sort of an immigrant into the learning community. You actually started off in UX and design,
Right.
Primarily working on externally customer-facing products and services. So, what is learning experience and how do you see it? Or excuse me, user experience.
So an experience is really the personally undergoing something. So you can't have an experience if you're not involved and you're not actually participating or engaged in something that's happening. Adding that user experience is really that specific, it's about an ecosystem, it's about different touch points, it's about emotions, it's about channels. So as you undergo some sort of experience, you are doing many different things. It's a journey, right? So every interaction from when you find out about a product or a learning situation experience to when you have an outcome based off of that is part of that experience, part of that journey. So you really have to design this with customer outcomes, but also, so there are business needs involved too. You have to, so really user experience is that merge of the user goals and the business needs so that you can provide the optimal outcome for both.
And if you want to add to that, what else would you say is part of what is user experience?
I think for me, ultimately, it's kind of just like the classic know your audience and knowing who your user is and defining who that is before even creating a course or a curriculum or anything like that is to know who you're actually talking to and getting to know what motivates and drives them rather than just making an assumption of what a training should look like and basing it on the trainer's point of view and what information can I cram in here in this amount of time.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like, kind of like what Dan was talking about this morning, that personalization of it is really, UX is a way to operationalize that personalization in a way. Samantha, what would you say?
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that. I think, oftentimes it's just your interaction with everyday products, services, companies. And similar to what Dan was saying earlier, sometimes the best user experience is forgettable because you didn't have an awful experience. So you don't remember that you hated this service or you hated that thing. It's just easy. And so, that was easy, and kind of move on.
Yeah. All right, so Michael, I deliberately left you to the end because you didn't grow up in thinking about technology and user experience. You sort of migrated into it yourself. So how do you think about what user experience is?
I'll give you an example. One of the things that we do at the company where I am, we're a large biopharmaceutical company, and so we have a lot of scientists, and we know that they can go pretty much anywhere to get their learning, right? And so we created kind of a webinar experience, and we said, look, we're going to create these webinars. They're 1 hour long. And you're going to get some expert content on a specific area. And it could be something on strategic planning or delegation or communication skills and so forth. And we built that experience in a way that met the needs, to your point, right, to the audience. And so what we ended up doing is we said, we're going to first bring in a vice president to the company. And they're going to talk for 5 to 7 minutes about their experience on that topic. And then we're going to shift and turn to an expert on the topic, who will do some education, some training, basically some teaching on that topic. And then we open it up for questions. So this is all webinar based. People can log in, totally voluntary, 1 hour. And we ran the first one, and we did it as a pilot. And I was kind of listening in as it was happening in my office, and as it ended, I heard applause outside. And I thought it was somebody's birthday or something like that. But people were actually attending the webinar and were applauding because they liked the experience, right? I thought, we're onto something right here. But we met the needs of these scientists, right? So they don't want to actually have to get into a classroom and talk to other people and be wrong. They wanted to be able to do that privately at their own cube or their desk and so forth. And just like Dan said earlier, we fail half the time. We win, we do things right. This was one that we got right. And so we continued to replicate it. So we started, the first one, we had 350 people on. The next one, 700. The next one was 1,500 people around the globe. And somebody from IT came running down the hall and said, "What are you doing? You broke the internet." And we had to kind of scale that back. But it was really just by design, a winning combination that we piloted it, and that one happened to work. So we continue to run those.
Mm-hmm. So just to add on what Michael was saying, piloting something is great, right? So design really is a process for learning, and it's about doing things and iterating. So starting with something small, taking what you learn to help really grow that experience, and just course correcting over time and pivoting to really till you end up where you want it to be. And that was for you breaking the internet, right? So,
right.
I mean, you probably didn't want to break the internet.
Yeah, I mean, can you break down sort of this idea of UX? Because I think you both give some nice examples. What are some of those other key elements? So iteration, is it? Really kind of thinking through the audience that you're trying to serve through this. What do you also? What do the rest of you, Samantha and Rhoda, see as fundamentals of user experience? That if we're going to take this idea and apply it to our learning experiences, that we need to really make sure we do right.
One of them, it's an extension of what we were talking about before in terms of knowing your audience, but just having a learner personas ready. If you're launching any new program, to know who exactly is my learner, what's relevant and motivates them, and starting from that, and then iterating from there, because you're learning about your learner as they're learning from your content or your materials. And the more you learn about them, the more you can tailor and adjust what it is for them.
Mm-hmm. Anything you'd add, Samantha?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you were saying earlier about just kind of learning and course correcting. I think that a lot of the fundamentals of UX and how you use it is the concept that it's cyclical, and there's no perfect solution, and your product is growing and it's going to continue to change because we're humans and we all continue to change. Our habits, our likes, our needs, our wants, those are all evolving. So you want to build products that are also evolving as well.
So, sorry to jump in.
No, go, please.
The best way to learn about your user is to just talk to them, right?
Yeah.
Spend time with them, understand what they do, observe them. For us as designers, or for me as a designer, one of the things I like to do is really start to identify their unarticulated needs. So as you spend time with people, they're really good at pointing out pain points or just problems that they're having, and giving you some of their basic needs. But a lot of people, they don't know what they don't know, and sometimes that's technology. So if you can find this unarticulated need and a way to solve that problem and then present it back to them, like their mind is blown. It's amazing. And that's like my favorite part of what I do, is when I really have learned enough about somebody. And before I was at Polaris, I was at 3M and working in healthcare and building enterprise software for hospitals that are used by doctors and nurses. And I'm not a doctor or a nurse, but by the end of the day, I kind of knew what they wanted to do just by spending time with them. And spending enough time with them really helps you provide a valuable solution to them.
And I would add to that, in the end then, make it super simple, right? It can't be confusing. I go back to that 7 to 10 seconds, right? So when they get onto a platform or onto a site or whatever the experience is, it can't be complicated, at least not in the beginning, right? But that first experience, it has to be super simple. 1 click, 2 clicks, something like that. They have to be able to get in because they're in their mind kind of counting down 7, 6, 5. Am I gonna stay? Am I not gonna stay? And they'll go elsewhere, right?
Bouncing off that, I think one of the hallmarks that you were talking about is like empathy for your user, and just having empathy for like what they're going through as they're going through the training, and you can spend all this time making the most beautiful e-learning. And until you actually do some user testing and sit with them and see what their experience there is, you might not know that the Wi-Fi in that room doesn't work. And that happened to me before. And maybe you were focusing on the wrong thing the whole time. Or one example is we spent some time making an e-learning program, and we wanted to test it out. We were going to test this to see if it worked, if it looked good. And what we did was record the screens of people as they were interacting with this to see how it worked. And we were interested in seeing, could they navigate the UI that we made? What we actually found was that there are 7 tabs open, and this was just a small window on the side, and people are chatting or doing other things, which gives you different types of information, but informative on how you're going to approach the overall program.
Samantha, are there any examples of programs that you've run through GE or elsewhere that you would point to as a good example of how you've applied UX principles in learning programs?
Sure. My colleague Sarah yesterday was presenting on Brilliant U, our social learning platform at GE. When we first started, we did not have anything like that at all. We had an LMS that was like 8 to 10 versions behind, so super clunky. And we had a lot of in-classroom experiences, but we didn't have anything online that really pulled all the pieces together. And what we learned was that how we had been marketing our learning was too fancy and not simple enough. So people couldn't figure out how to get to courses. They couldn't figure out how to get to books. They couldn't figure out how to get to articles because we had fancy names for all of that stuff. So for us, the way that we designed our entire platform was taking the methods of UX and applying them to learning. So in UX, we say human-centered design, and in this case, we said, well, it's going to be a learner-centered design. So who are our learners? How do we think, how do they learn, and what are their expectations? So through the process of creating personas and really starting to understand our employees, we figured out what their pain points were, what their goals were, and we began to build experiments, small learning sites that eventually grew into this awesome platform and really just took it all back to them again and again with every iteration. We would place it right back in front of our employees and say, was this meeting your expectation? Or talk to them similar to what Andy was saying is, you keep talking to people and you really learn about what they are, what they want, and how they want to learn. And so we changed the entire way we were designing and simplified it. So we have a tab now called books. We've got a tab called videos, courses, instead of these fancy titles, because nobody was understanding how to get there.
Yeah, and I think that, I want to open it up for audience questions here in a moment. So if you have questions, we're going to have some microphones around. But coming back to that point, I think there are a lot of misconceptions about UX and what it is. And it can be, the term itself can be intimidating. But as you said, it really can be simplified if you really think it through. But what are other big misunderstandings that you think people have about UX, similar to mine, that maybe it doesn't need to be complex, it doesn't need to be very, it can be fairly simple. What are some of the other big misunderstandings that people have about it? We'll start here and kind of run through.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, I would say, is that if you build it, they will come. And you really got to talk to people before you build or buy. I mean, the product might look shiny and nice and have all the bells and whistles, but if you don't put it in front of your employees and your people, you'll never know whether or not they're going to love it. I would say that's like one big one.
So you're saying that don't necessarily listen to the salespeople.
Yeah.
Sales pitch. No offense to the salespeople who might be out there. Rhoda, you?
I would agree with that. And also that it has to be technology, that has to be e-learning. I think UX can apply to in the classroom, to virtual learning, to all kinds of social learning, however you want to use it. But it's not always tech, and it doesn't always have to be, the latest, fanciest bells and whistles available.
Can you talk about that? Because I think that's an important point. So how would UX principles be applied in a classroom? Because you're right. When we think of UX, we're thinking of e-learning, we're thinking of technology. It's kind of where it grew out of. But how might it be applied in a classroom or elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to the fundamentals we were talking about of the learner and the learner personas and having empathy, it's just what is the experience in that classroom? What are their motivations when they're sitting there? How long can they sit there for before you need to get people up and moving? Is it just, if you at the end of the day have a lecture in a classroom and you record that lecture and you put it on an LMS, it's still a lecture. We haven't really changed very much there.
Mm-hmm. Andy?
So I think that, and this really hits home for me as being in UX all day long, people seem to think that the UX designers are just these people that come in with Post-it notes and Sharpies and they sit down and we have workshops, and at the end of the day, that's it. We only care about our users. And really, like, UX is a weird word. I'd like to change the U in user for, like, P for people, because we really are focused on people and their outcomes and having empathy for those people, understanding what they think about, what they feel, what they fear, along every step of what we're building for them. So we're really not just about, like, workshops, and we're about solving problems. And learners, users, people, whatever you want to call them, like, we really want to get to the root cause of what their goals are and how we make those easier for them to achieve.
Michael.
So I think a lot about marketing, believe it or not, when I'm thinking about this, and your comments about the words and making them, real concrete and easy. We actually have somebody full-time on our talent development team that does nothing but marketing. And she thinks about communication and marketing of the tools, the resources, the solutions that we make available, so that the messaging is congruent to how our users want to take it in and how they're going to experience it. Because we can fall into the trap of using words that might sound right for us and so forth, but she's not letting us do that. So the marketing of what we build has to make sense, and she keeps us honest with that as well. So the experience can be there, but it has to make sense for the audience.
I think Michael makes a good point there in the fact that, so as the user experience designer, it's not just the end user that we're focused on. We're focused on the purchaser. So who's going to actually buy that learning experience or that software for their team to use? They need to immediately see the value so that they'll write that check to buy that. Who's going to market that product, and who are they going to market it to? That's as important as the end user sometimes. The end user is great, right? They're the person that we're really solving their problem for. But they have to explain the benefits to them, to the people that make those purchasing decisions. And we have to make that evident too. So we really need to focus on all the different sets of users, and that's where the personas come in too.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'd like to open it up to the room. We do have a couple of microphones. If you have a question, raise your hand, and we'll ask the panel to chime in. All right, we've got one up front. Ashley, if you wouldn't mind, there's someone right up front here.
Hit us hard, Lloyd.
Yeah, and if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lloyd Braithwaite. I'm with Jackson Health System right here in South Florida. Thank you for being here. Particularly for you, Michael, you said something that really resonated with me. You've got about 7 seconds to capture their attention. So within that space, and maybe all of you can kind of touch on this, what's the secret sauce? We know that we're moving in this direction of these multimedia ways of learning. Just like you mentioned, just because you build it doesn't mean they're going to come. And if you've got 7 seconds to capture attention, how do you do that?
You've got 7 seconds. Go.
Holy smokes. I will tell you that we separated from a large company 5 years ago. So I joined AbbVie just after the separation. And at the time, our users were used to pretty much classroom-only learning. As a matter of fact, 1 day was great, 2 days were better. And so we had to go in and think about how do we change that. And I would say that for us, it meant being bold to say, this is not a good user experience. This is not a good learner experience. And so we did change let's just talk classroom for a moment here. We changed our classroom solutions so that we offer, and it's not based on time, but it's based on what those experiences would be. So I specifically tell all of our facilitators, you're not getting in there and you're not gonna have Play-Doh on the tables and beach balls and all this kind of goofy stuff. You're getting in there and we're gonna start right away and we're gonna move. And we want people to feel, wow, I'm at the right place at the right time. I came into this learning experience. Everything was set out ready to go. I mean, it is like tops in my book, that experience when they walk in. I want the learners to feel like we were expecting them. We didn't just make this up. And so it's all about business for us, and it's all about driving their performance, but it starts with that very beginning, how they start out in the beginning of and again, just a formal classroom experience. It's got to be right on right away. So we spend a lot of time right on that beginning piece.
Yeah, and you raise a good point. In thinking about it from a CLO perspective, sort of an enterprise perspective, that attention and time is something that learners don't have, Managers don't want to give up for the people that are going through learning, so that attention to time and making sure that experience is really valuable is really critical. Anything you guys want to add as far as how you do that hook?
So 94% of first impressions are visual. So you have to have something that's visually appealing and visually seems like it could solve a problem for somebody. And it's all based on knowing who that person is. But beyond that, like you've got to present information to them that's relevant to the time that they're looking at it and makes them realize in that 7 seconds that this is capturing my interest, it's starting to solve something that I want to know, and how do I want to dive deeper on it? It's kind of like giving them a little taste so that they go further.
Rhoda, Samantha, anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, I think what you're really touching on is just having a very clear learning objective, but a performance. For me, I think it's really important to have a performance-based learning objective that just from the start, someone knows like this will be important for me. I will know how to apply this, and I don't feel alienated by fancy words or anything else, but I know exactly what I'm going to get out of this, and it'll be quick.
Yeah.
So Samantha, I'm kind of curious, compliance training, because people, if you think about the training that people go through that they most don't want to go through and are least interested in, it's often compliance training. But they have to, so they do. So how can you make compliance training more interesting?
Yeah, and I think, part of the piece of what Andy was saying with the visual aspect is that you have to, and kind of looping in some methodology there, is that you really do have to understand who your employees are or who your personas are in that case. So if people are, more apt to the Play-Doh and the, beach ball experience, that's what they expect and that's what you serve them. But if they're, a little bit more buttoned up, but don't like the click through a PowerPoint experience and want something a little bit more lively, then you kind of figure out how to design for that. So I think it really just depends on who it is you're designing for.
So the secret sauce, right? So there's something called a 5-second test. And you can literally put something in front of somebody and let them look at it for 5 seconds and ask them what they remember from that page. Based on what they remember, then you kind of know what they're looking at and where their eyes are drawn. And there are other studies you can do that there's a visual attentive system that will predict where eyes will focus when they first come to a specific screen or page, or just even look at a billboard or a room of people that you could barely see. But do a 5-second test, see what people retain, and then you don't even have to worry about seconds 6 and 7 right off the bat.
I know we have a question over there with Malaz.
So Wendy White with International Paper, and our focus has been mostly the blue-collar workforce at the manufacturing facilities. And you've talked a lot about understanding who your owner is, spending time. How, with a large population, do you filter out the squeaky wheel, that 10% that's going to complain no matter what it is, to truly get to your general population user experience needs? Have you run into that challenge, or has your populations been a lot easier to do that are smaller?
So
Andy?
populations are funny because you'll start to realize that people want customized experiences over time. So how do you solve for that 80% and not really customize? And it might be lowering your sample size. So they say if you study like research usability sessions through Nielsen, 8 to 12 users is when you start to see a lot of like repetition in what they want or the responses that they give. Obviously that's very qualitative, and if you want to mix that with quantitative numbers, you can open up things like surveys to a large number of people or turn on ways that you can kind of observe what they're doing. But you'll really start to see a lot of that repetition, and there'll always be people that want a specific thing or need something customized, but you can't really solve for every customization. You can build in flexibility so that you can start to have customization for some of those people, but based on what that squeaky wheel is, and if other people aren't having that same need, then I really wouldn't worry about that 10% of people they'll figure it out. So we want to really provide a great experience for people, but what we forget is people have been figuring out how to navigate shitty websites and experiences since day one, right? They've gotten used to it. You can go on any site and find your way. So obviously, yeah, we want to keep you in 7 seconds, but people they'll find a way. You just have to continue to make that better for them over time.
I'd also just add that don't limit yourself to just one persona. You could have multiple personas and see how they interact, or maybe that means you need 3 different courses, depending on how different they are.
Other questions from the audience? All right, we're going to keep going then. So I want to broaden it out a little bit. So we talked to sort of the factors that are driving some of the change and innovation that's happening. We spent some time talking about UX, what it is, what are some of the fundamentals of it. Now, as we take those principles and try to put it together with a learning strategy, the overall learning experience, what from UX do you feel is important for us to include in our conception of the learning experience? I've heard simplicity is key to design. UX doesn't necessarily need to be applied, or UX principles can be implemented outside of technology as part of a classroom. What else do you feel is important as you sort of broaden out the idea of what UX can do much more broadly across the learning experience? What do you think is important for us to include? Samantha, how about you?
Good question. I would say part of thinking about how you could include UX broadly and some of the key factors would be thinking of your product as living and breathing, and not thinking that you have to wait a whole year to release something, because in a year's time it might be old. So knowing that you might be experimenting, and sure, that experiment might fail, but you might learn from those failures and take those lessons and build it into the next set of whatever it is you're trying to release. And then going back to some of the basic methodologies of understanding who your audience is, and talking to the people who are going to be going through the experiences, knowing the truth about your product. If it's clunky and bad, then you need to know that it's clunky and bad. You can't ignore it. And if it's great, you got to learn what's so great about it, because that's going to clue you into whatever else you can continue to do as an opportunity for growth. So I would say one of the biggest takeaways for my team that we tend to do yearly is to think 10x about our learners. So where is the learner of 2028 going to be, and what does that experience look like for them? Is it going to be AR, VR? Is it going to be that we've got robots moving around and facilitating classes? And work backwards. So build out some sort of a roadmap of how do you get to 2028? What are your moonshot ideas, and work backwards using UX to build it.
Interesting. Rhoda, how about you?
I think it's having a lot of humility in whatever your products are, and knowing that what is built and what you have is either going to change or be retired very shortly, and being okay with that. And just having that humility of knowing that your learner probably knows more than you do about what they need, and listening to that. And it doesn't always have to be direct feedback or something they give, but it could be shown through the way they just interact with something. I don't know if everyone does like feedback surveys, and usually if you have a 1 to 5 scale, it's like 5s, and like a 4 is horrible or something like that. So people are very generous with direct feedback, but trying to see beyond what they're just saying and what they're actually doing is a good way of getting more information about how you can better serve your learner.
So learners are going to continue to evolve. How they learn is going to continue to evolve. You've got to stay ahead of that, or at least keep an ear to what's happening so that you're not behind. It's the only way to really advance. Beyond that, people, the way they learn has really changed, right? We're consuming a lot smaller, shorter content. We're not interested in sitting in front of a computer for an hour to learn and have somebody bore us to death about what they want us to learn and what that looks like. Maybe you start listening to something in the car, and then as you leave the car, you switch to your phone and you're still listening so you can get this audible content. Beyond that, then hey, I'm in front of my computer now. I have 10 minutes before my next meeting. Can I just pick up where this left off and see a few things? And then, can I pick that up later again on my drive home? So it's really about understanding how people are learning and how that continues to evolve. Like I said, design, user experience, it's a process for learning. So it's important to leverage that to continue to understand our customers and their changing needs.
Michael.
So I think it's important to keep the strategy in front of us in what we're doing. And so, and my UX colleagues up here may disagree with this point, but we just built something out. We had our employees going to a website, basically, and it was just kind of a farm of links, and there were probably about 50 of them. It was related to careers, career development. Some of you are smiling. You know what I'm talking about, right? Click, click, where do I go? And click, click, and they're wasting a lot of time. So we built an experience for them that is not that. It's a very reflective, kind of self-reflective experience where it asks them 6 basic questions so that they can reflect first and then move into not even a kind of a link farm, but more of a guided, where do I go from here? So that all made sense. But the piece where I'm saying keep the strategy in front of you is this was going to be a fundamentally different way of thinking about careers, career development, career enhancement at my company. So we actually then created a very short 2.5-minute video that goes in the front of that whole experience. So when you land at this page, at the site, the video is there. Now where I may get some pushback up here is, and I got pushback from some of our leaders, is that we actually make people watch that video. So you actually have to click on the video before you can advance to see anything else. And we debated about that. The marketing person and I, we all debated about that. But we said, this is so fundamentally different around the globe. If we're not doing that now, when will we do that? So we, again, elevated what's our strategy, and then we built around, okay, so we have to do it this way. And the response has been great. So when you come back subsequent visits, it's gone, it's off to the side. But the response has been great, and people are watching it all the way through, and they understand what we're after. So I don't know, we might get a little pushback, but we're making them actually kind of watch that 2.5 minutes, and it seems to be working for us.
So I wouldn't debate that, right? You've put something out, you had a strategy, a goal that you wanted to solve, you tested it, you measured it, and it's working out well. Maybe explore the opportunity of allowing them to skip that, or that's what I would say. That's like my gut reaction. Like, don't force someone to sit through it. But if they are and it's working, like, why change that? Right? You can always put out a little A/B test and try a skip later on and see how that goes over time. But if they're only seeing it one time and it's not obtrusive to their experience, like, it's working. Yeah. You can't argue with success, right?
It's 2.5 minutes long. If you had said it was like 10 minutes long,
no.
I would.
And we get them in the first 7 seconds, so it's good.
Those 7 seconds better be good.
All right, so there's a big assumption here that the people who are funding a lot of the efforts that you're using UX to design have kind of just given you carte blanche to do whatever you want. You guys are the experts. Many times you have people who are coming in funding say, I know what I want, just go design it. How do you work with internal stakeholders who seem to have some of those preconceived ideas about how you should design? What are some of those conversations or questions or approaches you might take to sort of redirect them and say, hey, I know you're at step 5, but let's go back here and get back to step 1 so we can better understand. How would you all approach that? Samantha, how about you?
Yeah, it's a great question and one of our biggest challenges. I mean, GE is a 126-year-old company now, and UX has infiltrated mainly in a lot of the IT parts of the organization. And so when we first started bringing it into learning, it was an uphill battle. And it was like, why should we think and do this way? We've never done it this way before. And so oftentimes, when I'm faced with either stakeholders or teams who come and they think that they need some sort of digital, fun, fancy tool that's going to solve all of their problems, the reality is you've kind of got to reel them back in and try to understand exactly what the problem is. And I think Andy mentioned it before, is a lot of UX is really problem solving. So what's the problem you're trying to solve for, and what's the outcome that you want to get out of it? And then UX is kind of like the path to get there. And so what we try to do is kind of set expectation and say, well, first I need to understand the problem, and hopefully in how you're trying to understand that problem and how you're speaking with the team that maybe just expects you to give them something, it'll change their mind about, maybe we didn't really understand what the problem was to begin with, and can we potentially do a small experiment first and learn a little bit more about why you want to do that before going out and putting your budget and that towards it. And potentially it might not even be what you needed, and it might not be successful. So we kind of give them a futuristic look of what could go wrong and what could go great, and what's the easiest way for us to know how to go.
Mm-hmm. So Rhoda, I imagine you must have the opposite problem. Uber grew up as a mobile-first company. I mean, it's just sort of baked in. I mean, does that resonate with you?
I probably didn't have to have as much of the hurdle as you did in terms of getting people bought in on a UX approach to things. I'm very embracive of testing and A/B testing and seeing things out. Where I work with my stakeholders more is the time of, oh, can we have a training tomorrow ready? Or something ready, like, usually, I've had that before of, oh, today's Monday, you need until Wednesday to have everybody trained, not just to have a training ready. And I think it's more working with them and setting those expectations of finding, well, what is this training about and why do we need it? What is the purpose or the objective of this? And basically asking that question over and over again until I get the answer of, oh, it's because of this specific action or this specific behavior that we're trying to target. Ultimately, I think it's the reason why people are bought into UX, or that it is such a big thing that not just my team, but a lot of teams kind of work through and kind of think about things with this lens on, is that ultimately it's about efficiency. So it is helping the business. It's for those that are asking for trainings, it's making it so it can be more efficient for them in the end.
So I've got both of those kind of similarities coming at me. So 3M is very much like GE, 100-plus-year-old company, history, tradition, and innovation, successful products. UX is probably 4 years old in that company, and less than 0.01% of the employees are UX designers. At Polaris, it's slightly different. I mean, technology's a thing there, obviously. But beyond that, like everyone in our building, everyone that works for the company technically thinks they're a user of our product because they're passionate about our vehicles, they own multiple vehicles, like they've built everything for them. And UX, again, has been there for a little while, but never had like a seat at the table like it does now. So the mix between those is, A, how do you balance these stakeholders that do know the product more than I do? It's about influencing them, right? So at 3M, it was spending time with them, having empathy for our stakeholders also, and figuring out like what problems they need to solve and working with them to do that. And it starts out small. You've got to show value. You've got to prove that you're not just showing up to a meeting and interjecting, and because you're the designer, they should listen to you. It really is about working with them and just, you know, start out with a PowerPoint, right? Like they're working in PowerPoint. Designers hate that. I'll change your PowerPoint to make it look really nice, but at the same time, I start to inject a little bit of my vision into that and build a relationship. And on the Polaris side of things, it's like, yeah, stakeholders might be part of the user segment, but you're not the users. So I guess the selfish designer in me wants to say like, I'm an expert. You hired me for a specific thing. Let me do my thing. But really, I can't do my thing. I can't design without having all of this knowledge and spending time with the whole team that we're going to be working with. So really, it's this dance, right, that design does when they have to understand users and satisfy stakeholders and focus on building an experience. And it really is about empathy, right? I mean, having passion for our users, our products, and the people we work with.
Yeah, the headline for me is that PowerPoint can be an infiltrator. You can use that to change minds.
Sadly.
And approaches. Yeah. Michael, anything you want to add?
Yeah, so I love this question because I think it's such a unique challenge, and like Samantha said, you know, you kind of go into the performance consulting mode, and so very often, I tell our team one of the hardest things to have to do is to be able to politely say no. And how do we get there? We get there by asking good business strategic questions of the business leader who's in front of us. What have you seen in your recent employee engagement survey or data that would give you an indication that you need something on X? And so when we start to drive and we really are just kind of asking those questions, that then gives us information so that we can then say, well, in order to achieve blank, here's what's needed, and it's not, a workshop in 20 minutes, right? And so we help them understand then what we would build towards and let us be the experts in how to actually build that, but we want to be able to help you get to the outcome you want to drive the business results that you want, and it has to start with really good questions that are relevant to them. So we do a lot of that right up front.
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to like what UX is, now that I think about it, like UX is about collaboration. It's about solving problems together. And I don't know why I threw that in, it just felt right.
No, but it sounds good. Yeah. No, it's a good point. I think people tend to think of UX and they think technology, oh, I got tech people to do that. But you're right, it is it's human-centered.
Right.
I think we've got a question here.
Yes, I'm Diane August. I'm from Nationwide. Just am curious about the role that you all play. And you've all mentioned business impact, whether you have a metrics approach or something that you can isolate about the UX experience to show its value in terms of end business impact measurement.
No, who wants to start on that one?
I can start. So there are two ways to measure things. So there's the black and white metrics, and there's gray area. As designers, we're not great at math, so we rely on that gray area. So things like ROI, increase in any number that you're going after, something that you can easily provide analytics to, that's black and white. Other things that are black and white are if you have a simpler experience, you're spending less money on support, there's lower support costs, there's lower training costs. So those are solid ways to measure like financial impact. When you get to the gray area, it could be about like you had an idea, you tried it, it failed. Maybe your idea wasn't as great as you thought it was. Maybe the market wasn't ready for your big idea, or maybe you really sucked at the execution of it. It happens. From there, you just kind of realize it's time to pull the plug on this. It didn't work. By pulling the plug instead of spending time and resources to support that, you can dedicate those resources to other things. Then you've got more qualitative metrics like surveys. You know, it's a lot cheaper to retain a learner or a customer than it is to acquire a new one. So if you can get feedback on the experience that they're having and how likely they are to recommend that product to someone else, then you can have someone in accounting. I have Brett in my accounting department. I'm like, Brett, what does this mean? How much money did we save if we were able to retain these customers? And he goes and does that. There's a lot of other gray areas, but I don't want to take up the whole time, so sorry.
Now, Rhoda, how about you? Any tying into metrics?
I think for UX, having that approach lets you kind of be prepared for the future rather than always being reactive to this need that happened in the past and kind of ending in that cycle that might happen of like, we need to train to react to this, which never really moves it as forward and having forward thinking. And UX at least gives you that framework and the ability to have that approach ongoing and be more proactive and potentially be able to compare then like the before and the after in terms of changes in behavior or how people are acting now versus before. One of the things I mentioned before was like performance-based learning objectives, and if that's really, really well written and really well done, then that's something you can observe. Just did that behavior change, yes or no? And just being able to tie each one of those things to a course lets you know if this small micro module did have the impact that you intended.
Go ahead, Mike.
So at our company, we probably spend a lot less time evaluating what we're developing. We spend a lot more time evaluating talent. And by that, what I mean is, so we're at probably about 45% of what we deliver are things that we developed internally. 55% we buy from partners and so forth. What we've been able to identify is that as we have this thing called the Learner Profile Project, where and specifically for people leaders, we look over time, people leaders who have engaged in the content and the experiences that we've created, what happens to them over a given period of time. Now we're making some assumptions here that it's direct link, but we're seeing trends on this as well. So are they promoted more quickly than their peers who have not engaged in one of the custom experiences that we've created? Where do they show up, for example, in a 9-box? Where do they show up in terms of a people leader index? How are their teams evaluating them? What do their engagement scores look like? And that data, that gives us information. We're actually able to go back and identify, they went through these kinds of experiences that we created. So we're able to make some assumptions there, and then we go back and we talk with them as well. So we do have some lift because of that, and I think we're going to see some more of that moving forward because it's pretty powerful.
I think you can also look into the efficiency of things too. Like to your point earlier, when you redesigned that one page with all the links on it, I'm sure you could have looked at how much time it took somebody to go through that whole thing and how much time it takes now. And there's probably just a pretty easy way to just calculate the benefit and the cost savings just from that efficiency.
Yeah.
So we've got time for one more question if we have one out there in the audience.
Isn't there one over there?
Oh, we got one right over here in the front. We have 2 microphones coming your way. It's going to be a race.
Hi, my name is Megan Clough, and I'm wondering if you've journey mapped any of your learning experiences.
I didn't quite get, could you say that again? I'm sorry.
I'm wondering if you have journey mapped from a customer experience or people experience standpoint any of your learning experiences.
It looks like you were nodding, Samantha.
Yeah, we use journey mapping a lot. We journey map not only people's experiences throughout our social platform, so our learning site, but we also map some of their experiences of how they learned about a class, who they spoke to, what their emotions were, how they then found it. From there, what did they do to sign up? Once they got to the class, did they have all the information they needed to get there? Is there a point where they got lost? Is there a point where they maybe canceled their registration? Why they canceled the registration? So, we've used journey maps in a multitude of different ways, online and in person, stretching through learning and beyond, understanding people's careers and how they navigate and or how they use other products within our learning ecosystem.
So 3M also has a learning platform called Healthcare Academy, and that is for industry professionals that are learning about 3M products. And we did a lot of journey mapping actually around some of the simulated environments we were building. So it's just really like there are many different 3M healthcare users. There's dentists, orthodontists, infection prevention staff. We have a food safety division, so drug delivery also. So it was a series of like journey mapping based on all of the different user scenarios that we have. So it started out with our persona work, then it went to journey mapping, which we also included empathy mapping in, and we came up with a few like key scenarios that we wanted to journey map. It could be registering, it could be discovering a course, it could be actually going through the course, the different types of courses that we offered, and then it could be like completing a course or leaving feedback on a course. So there were really like micro moments that we were going after to see how we could improve those. And that was, a lot of fun and involved a lot of people and took a really long amount of time, probably over like 4 or 5 months to do true journey mapping for all of the different learners that we outlined. But the results were good. It launched on an LMS that was less than spectacular and performed way better than expected. And since then, I know that their LMS contract expired, and I'm not there anymore, but I know that they switched. And a lot of the work that we were hoping to leverage the new LMS for before I left is starting to see the light of day and get tested. So it was a really good experience. I would recommend doing that for anyone that's trying to document a true learning experience.
All right, so we've got less than a minute here. We truly might just have 7 seconds for each of you to answer this question, each. Just final piece of advice, as you're thinking about this idea of the learning experience, what final piece of advice would you offer the audience? And Michael, we'll start with you.
I would say don't hesitate. Don't hesitate and just go and experiment. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be done to lead you to what it is you're trying to achieve.
Andy.
Understand your learner more than they understand themselves.
Nice. Rhoda?
Make personas, or choose one thing, just start with that.
Samantha?
And test, and then test again. That's right.
You guys did it under 7 seconds each. That's pretty impressive, yeah.